This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 51 of Here's How. Smári McCarthy was elected to the Icelandic Parliament for the Pirate Party this week. In this podcast, an interview that I recorded with Smári shortly before the election.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
I'm joined on the line now by a pirate. Smári McCarthy is a candidate in the upcoming Icelandic general election, the election for the Icelandic Parliament. McCarthy doesn't sound like a typical Icelandic name. I know that you're part Icelandic, part Irish, Smári. Tell me exactly what the Pirate Party is, where it came from, why you got involved.
The Pirate Party is a political movement that started in Sweden around the middle of the noughties, centered around ideas about access to information, privacy, civil liberties in the kind of digital realm, and was really filling a gap where no political movements at the time were actively taking an interest in this kind of emerging environment of online civil liberties and so on. But we've evolved quite a bit since then and have just kind of broadened our base to think not just about civil liberties in the kind of digital context, but also the wider context of society in general. And so we're using a very strong civil liberties backed approach and a very kind of information driven approach, general public to political parties. But then, of course, they grew to be much more than that. So we're kind of following a similar trajectory with a somewhat different, and in my opinion, better, basis point to start from.
Is it possible that you're overselling that slightly? I know the name, the Pirate Party, it came from essentially people wanting to download and upload content that might be copyrighted without fear of being prosecuted.
That's a very antagonistic way of putting what has been one of the most interesting kind of discussions in the last decade. So what really was happening was, so if you want to go into the history of this, there was a kind of anti-piracy bureau set up by Hollywood lobbyists in Sweden in 2006-ish, and they were arguing, okay, copyright violations are bad. Okay, fair enough. Except they were arguing in favor of putting in place various restrictions on how computer technology could be used, proposing that all internet connections be spied on, and so on and so forth. So around the same time, a group of activists responded by forming what was known as a piracy bureau. And their basis was to say
the Pirate Bay was based in Sweden as well. This was a huge torrent website where they didn't specifically host pirated material, but you could certainly find a lot of pirated material there.
Yeah. So the Pirate Bay became a spin-off from the Pirate Bureau, and the way that this was, the way that people were thinking about this was not just, hey, let's just, allow copyright violations willy-nilly, but rather a more ideological statement of, look, the marginal cost of copying data is now zero, and there are people who do not necessarily have the economic means to acquire, whichever data. So there is a need for.
We're talking about films and music here.
Yeah, sure, but also books and also whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So there is certainly a kind of freeloader aspect to this, and I'm not going to defend that bit. But the ideological observation of saying, look, when the marginal cost of reproduction is zero, and people are still fighting to control the spread of information, which can be done by various means, encrypted, non-encrypted, whatever, then of course you get into a question of, okay, how is it acceptable that a group of people are fighting for the right to exclude certain people from knowledge on the basis of economics, while simultaneously requesting the right to spy on and monitor everybody's internet connection and to put restrictions on how people can use technology. So okay. we're not saying copyright
would you say that the core of what you were saying was that the goal, preventing piracy, was being sought after with disproportionate means by putting essentially spying technology into all computers and all internet connections?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, you also have this kind of big question about whether people have the right to know, whether people have the right to seek information and impart information, and where the line gets drawn there. So, if we imagine, that the works of, Plato or Aristotle were to come out today, and I were to read them and say, wow, this is absolutely groundbreaking stuff, I really want, my friends to know about this, I would actually be restricted in doing, and sharing that information by copyright. Now, we
hold on for a second there. First of all, you're not restricted on sharing Socrates or Aristotle because those works are obviously out of copyright and have been for millennia. Anything that is published now will be out of copyright, even in the most restrictive countries, within less than a century. Just 1 second. If it is, if a regime exists whereby copyright either doesn't exist or is impossible to enforce, then why should anybody bother creating anything new or original if they're never going to get paid for it?
Yeah, well, so I did say that I meant if those works were to come out today, which means it would be under copyright. And it's actually an interesting point that both Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, etc., actually did write those works, despite the fact that there was no copyright in existence at the time.
But what was developed at the time was that was extremely rare. One or two people in ancient Greece wrote things that are still relevant.
Yeah,
now,
sure, absolutely. But
it was the exception. Look, now it's the rule.
Yeah. No, here's the thing. Human creativity is a limitless thing. People will always create just because they want to. That is the nature of humans. We are creative as a species. However, there are the original argument for copyright was protecting the economic rights of the creators to a certain degree. Actually, if you go back to like the Statute of Anne, it actually much more so was in order to allow the government to restrict the publication of things which they didn't agree with, and so on and so forth. But the economic rights of artists were definitely one of the concerns. Now, we don't dispute that. We want to actually protect the economic rights of artists. We just think that restricting the distribution is a disproportionate way of doing so in a era where reproduction of a digital artifact is something that has zero marginal cost.
So it has zero marginal cost, but it does have an enormous cost to create. And people, for example, enjoy Hollywood blockbuster films like the Marvel and DC films that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to create.
Absolutely.
If those studios lose the ability to monetize that, it doesn't matter how creative the studios are, they're not going to be made.
This is true, but even with all of the rampant illegal copying of movies that's going on, you still see that movies are making more money than ever at the moment. Artists can be well monetized, wealthy, possibly even wealthier than ever, while simultaneously protecting the rights of individuals in society. That's basically where we want to go with this.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to move on to that. And I know, obviously, you're based in Iceland.
Yep.
The Pirate Party has had some success and been represented in the National Parliament in Iceland. They've also had members of the European Parliament elected from Sweden and Germany, I believe. I know in Berlin right now the Pirate Party is defending. It got quite a large vote in the last state elections in Berlin in Germany,
Yes.
and they're fighting to retain their seats in the Berlin government. And the Pirate Party has essentially broadened its focus and is particularly interested in digital rights and digital privacy, moving away from piracy prevention. What do you see as the most important policy goal that you have in that?
Okay, so you take a city like Shenzhen, where there are over 4 million CCTV cameras that are operated by the public authorities. You look at a city like London, which has over 2 million such cameras, and that's
yeah.
one
Some
thing.
people in some countries might find that unbelievable. In London, the UK is a particular example whereby there are literally millions and millions of CCTV cameras. In some countries, I guess people in the United States would find that absolutely shocking. The authorities are surveilling people to that extent. There's an extent to which they're popular. People think that there's some sort of like talisman against crime. But if there's
Right.
2 million
Yeah,
cameras, are there 2 million people watching them, or is it just
No, of course
pointless?
not. So that's the thing. These cameras are recording, and the argument for them is that it allows it somehow deters crime, which the statistics just do not bear out. The violent crimes, for instance, do not go down, but they move around to different locations in cities where there have been massive CCTV installations. You also think about the possibility of rewinding and reviewing and seeing kind of evidence, but in practice, there hasn't been a major uptick of solved crimes due to CCTV cameras. And we see this also in the phone system, right? So most European countries have implemented a European directive from 2006 called the Data Retention Directive. Mm-hmm. And what it says is that every telecoms provider is required to store information about the origin and destination, the duration, and the amount of data transferred in every telecommunications transaction. So
this is like a detailed bill. They're keeping in a database everybody's itemized phone bill for 2 years, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, it varies from 6 months to 2 years, depending on country. But it basically, it's an itemized phone bill, but it isn't just your phone calls. It's your text messages. It's which websites you visit and in which order you visit them. It's all sorts of stuff like this, which, it's generally called metadata collectively. And this is done by way of this data retention directive in Europe. And because it's a legal measure, we have lots of statistics on how effectively it's been working. And the reality is, this measure is costing consumers about only €2 per person, but in aggregate that's per year. But in aggregate that's a really large number that's being spent on this. But in terms of effectiveness, we're talking about statistics from Denmark suggesting that the average person has 625 different events logged to their name every day. So that's different websites they're visiting, different messages they're sending, etc., and so on. Yet the total number of crimes that have been solved. So generally speaking, crimes which involve telecommunications in any way were being solved at a rate twice as high as other crimes even before this was adopted. And what we've seen now is that retained telecommunications data has only been effective in 0.00025% of cases. Right? That's statistics from Germany. So what this means is it's expensive. It's disproportionate because it's monitoring every telecommunications activity of every person in society.
This is the way Europe handles this.
It just doesn't work.
Sure. It does seem to be true, though, that the authorities really, really want this information to be available. In Europe, they do it by directive and require the telecoms companies to retain that metadata. In the US, this is done by the NSA, and we saw with the Snowden leaks that they're essentially they're achieving the same effect by just taking all the data and keeping it for as long as they like. Isn't it better that is done in an open way by governments in a way that can be reviewed than the NSA method that's just taking it and keeping it and doing what they want with it?
Yeah, so the NSA's prison program is illegal by any definition. There's no basis for it in US law. The European method, yes, it is more open and democratic. It is better to be doing it like that. But given that it is completely ineffective and is a violation of the principle of proportionality, it would be better to not do it at all. Governments seem to really like these kind of things. They like doing these things where they intrude into people's privacy and
this is true. And I'm wondering whether this is, because I think of the what's essentially called the cock-up theory of history, that, politicians are generally older guys. They're not all that tech savvy, and somebody comes along and shows them something shiny and new and says, hey, we can do all these clever things. Probably they can't do all that much clever stuff, and is it really that effective? Okay, you say it costs perhaps, a couple of bucks per person per year. Is there any serious negative consequence?
Yes, so violations of people's privacy rights, which, you can state it broadly, but the way that this turns out in practice is, you have a register of what everybody, all the communications everybody did. And this pretty quickly leads to somebody saying, hey, we can use this for this purpose and this purpose.
Such as?
And, in some cases, there have been known, the system administrators have been known to, use this information to spy on their spouses. In some cases, police have been accessing this information, without court orders in order to, track down, and frame innocent people. There have been cases where the data collected through these methods have leaked out onto the internet, and this has led to everything from household disagreements over people just becoming very, very suspicious of each other, to severe things like people losing their jobs because the information shows that they have some kind of disease, maybe are cancer victims or something like that, and cancer patients and just are seeking treatment, but the workplace would rather just not have to deal with that. So people lose their jobs. In some cases, you see people's insurance premiums go up because they're known to have some kind of factors that it's basically a whole host of different problems that come into existence once people's fundamental right to privacy is annulled.
I understand what you're saying, and I can see how people don't particularly like to be spied upon, but they don't seem to mind it that much, because essentially over the past decade, pretty much every adult in the Western world has put a sophisticated tracking device into their pocket whereby they can be tracked, and they seem to like having it there. But right. I'm wondering whether you're comparing this to a mythical past, because if we go back a couple of centuries where people lived essentially in small villages and operated in very small communities, the amount of privacy that people have now is much greater than people have had at almost any time in history.
I'm not sure if I'd agree with that. There's the concept of privacy has certainly changed. So the idea that the children leave the village to go to the big city in order to obtain a modicum of anonymity, that's a well-known concept, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly cities have become net manufacturers of anonymity over most of history. But at the same time, historically, we've had kind of cities and villages being relatively space constrained concepts, whereas nowadays, I can log onto social media and monitor what my friends are up to in all countries all around the world. Mm-hmm. Now that's fine because they're normally choosing which things they share, and there's a right to self-determination factor there. However, if I were a system administrator who could get in under the hood and see all of the things that were being registered from these friends of mine, such as their location, whether they're logged on at the moment or not, things like that. Mm-hmm. It very quickly becomes very creepy because you're basically monitoring everybody on the planet. Modular technology, of course.
I can see how that does become creepy. Are you aware of any negative outcomes that go beyond creepy?
Yes. It's a kind of long, complicated thing, but let's look at it like this.
Well,
right?
give me the headline case.
In a way, what you're asking for is the kind of big sensational stories, right? So you could ask for things like, okay, when have people been assassinated due to privacy leakages? Mm-hmm. That's actually relatively common. It doesn't get headlines pretty much ever, but the number of times when people have been killed by either authorities or organized crime groups or terrorists on the basis of their information having leaked is quite high. Mm. One example that is not certain but quite likely to have been the case was the death of Marie Corvin, a British journalist who was operating in Syria a couple of years ago, mm-hmm. where a rocket struck near where she was located, killing her and a fixer who was working with her. Mm-hmm. And it has been hypothesized by a lot of people and kind of suggested that the rocket was trained in on the location of her phone, mm-hmm. right? So, once you have that kind of information, you can do a lot of pretty bad things. I've been doing this kind of work in the kind of journalism space for quite a while, and we have, actively been targeted by governments, various governments who have been trying to reduce the ability of the journalists working with us to seek out information and get the story out. But I'm actually more interested in the less extreme case because journalists and activists and political operatives are always going to be they put themselves in the line of fire for a living, and of course we need to protect those people. But the people who are less protected are the general public, and if we think about it today, you have about 2.4 billion people in the world who are using email, mm-hmm. right? And in the old days of the early internet, anybody who wanted an email address would either, set up their own email server, or they would put, or they'd get an account at one of the kind of local town internet service providers. Yes. That was all, well and good.
And since then, there's been huge consolidation in email providers.
Yeah, now there's so the top 10 email providers in the world are handling about 95% of all email. Mm-hmm. Possibly more than that.
That means that there are much bigger targets. So if you hack one email provider, you've managed to take over a very large amount. You have access to a very large proportion of the world's email.
Yeah. And so, and when everybody goes to one place or just a few places, if it's one place, we call it a single point of failure. Mm-hmm. And so if that point fails, everything fails. And so, Facebook is essentially a single point of failure for 1.4 billion people. Mm-hmm. If their security were to fail, that would be a tremendous blow to a lot of people for, it would be a tragedy. Right?
Really? If somebody hacked my Facebook page?
Well, think bigger. If it's not just your Facebook page, but Facebook's data center, their main database mm-hmm. leaks. If for instance their entire
somebody private see my holiday photos.
Think more about all of your private conversations, all of your chats. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe, some people use the chats for entirely innocuous things, but, we don't know what people are talking about, and nor do we have a right to know mm-hmm. what people are talking about privately. And if everybody were to suddenly know what everybody had said privately, then that would be a disaster. Mm-hmm. But we're also thinking about, Twitter's a single point of failure for 600 million people. Skype is a single point of failure for another 600 million people. And so, basically it's, there are a few big services.
I want to stop you on that because I just wanted to kind of challenge that at an intellectual level. Although I think that if anybody hacked my, Facebook account, the main threat would be that they would die of boredom. But I'm looking at one case of Djukhar Judayev, who was the Chechen leader in the war against Russia. Mm-hmm. In 1996, which is more than 20 years ago, he was killed when the Russians accessed a satellite phone that he was using and used it to target a missile to kill him. Mm-hmm. But on a broader level, I'm not entirely sure that it's such a bad thing. That things that I don't mean necessarily killing somebody, but that information can leak out in such a large way. And in particular, I'm thinking of the Panama Papers. And mm-hmm. in Iceland, your prime minister, who you're now running as a candidate against his party in the election in Iceland, he was taken out because what would previously have been entirely secret was hacked and exposed, and his involvement in shady offshore companies was exposed, and the operations of the NSA was exposed by Edward Snowden, and the fact that it can be done in such an electronic way and such as you say, a single point of failure for a very large system actually mm-hmm. worked in his favor because he could take a vast amount of evidence with him, which has been feeding to the media.
Yeah, no, I agree. The humanity has gotten lucky a few times in the last let's say, decade or so. There's mm-hmm. been, massive data leaks, that have exposed a lot of wrongdoing, from, the documents that Chelsea Manning leaked, which proved massive war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. Mm-hmm. The Snowden documents, of course, which exposed mass scale illegal surveillance of the entire population of the planet. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Panama Papers were an interesting example of insight into a murky, untransparent, state of
organized crime and money laundering,
offshore tax havens and the like. So if we look at the total budget for investigative journalism globally, right? Mm-hmm. And so it appears to be something on the order of $40 million per year. And so if we compare that to the NSA, or to the Five Eyes network, so NSA and GCHQ in the UK and the various other, Canadian, New Zealand, Australian, intelligence agencies. My rough estimate based on what we know from the Snowden leaks about the NSA's, budget suggests that they have a budget of over $120 billion per year. in aggregate, right? And that is $120 billion, which is being used to spy on every man, woman, and child on the planet, right? And the argument for doing this is that they want to, keep us safe from terrorism and do all sorts of things like that, right? But when you start to look into like the effectiveness, just to dwell on that for a moment, right? The effectiveness of NSA. Okay, so how many actual terrorism attacks have they defended us against? How many terrorists have they caught? The answer is we don't know. So they're either not going to trial, or which would be a violation of our basic fundamental laws, right? Or they aren't being caught in the first place, in which case, all the money is being wasted. So, $120 billion being wasted on something that either doesn't work as we want it to or doesn't work at all. And if you compare that to the effectiveness of investigative journalists who exposed the Snowden files, who exposed the illegal monitoring of all people on the planet, or the effectiveness of the journalists working on the Panama Papers who exposed, billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of hidden assets in tax havens. I'd basically say, maybe we should be funding the journalists better and allow them to muck rake and allow them to dig down into the stories, because they, unlike the government authorities, do not have the legal authority to persecute people, to prosecute people, to drone people, to eliminate people by way of extrajudicial killing. Journalists basically don't do that. So, they are a more trustworthy party in this entire game, right?
Smári, I need to wrap it up, but just very quickly, when is the election taking place in Iceland?
The election is on the 29th of October, unless we're hoping 29th of October, but hopefully, hopefully they won't do anything silly.
Smári McCarthy, one of the founders of the Icelandic Pirate Party, also a candidate in the upcoming election. Not sure when it is. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay, thanks.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 51 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 4th of November 2016. There's links to Smári's website and other information on this podcast's page on the website. If you can think of a topic that should be covered in the next show, or if you want to suggest someone to include, and that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating, or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, follow the podcast on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, follow Smári at SMARIMC, subscribe to the podcast also so new shows automatically come into your podcast feed. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. If you don't know how to do that, there's step-by-step instructions along with contact details at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.